Dead Space: Remake is the remake of Dead Space 2008, which on one hand means that it has some pretty big shoes to fill with Dead Space fans raving about this game, and on the other hand, with recent remakes and reboots from developers, means as long as it can run, is a complete game, and doesn't have microtransactions, it's got a pretty good chance of being basically the greatest game ever. That being said, this is an overly critical review of Dead Space because I, someone who loves horror games but has never played a second of Dead Space, went into this game riding the Dead Space fan hype train a little too hard and came out on the other side like, that's it? I mean, it was a good game, but if you're calling this game perfect, you really should get your nostalgia in check. And now that I may have upset a couple people, let's begin. So we open our game, and genuinely curious, does waiting for shaders to build annoy anyone else? I don't play photorealistic AAA games often, but I did pick up MW2 Remake and now Dead Space, and both times I'm like, yes. I not only have to wait for a considerable download, but now I am left with my existential dread while I wait for this game to finish building itself. Not to mention that Dead Space is the first game I've ever seen be like, hey, peasant, you have me installed on your HDD and with your plebeian games, but I require that fine PCIe SSD you have your operating system on. Which honestly isn't that big a deal, an SSD only costs $50 to $100 depending, but it did make me have to sit through building the shaders again, which I was not happy about, and brings me to system requirements. I do not have a bad computer. I'm not saying it's top of the line by any means, but according to the Steam page, I should have been able to run this game at optimal settings without issues. I had issues. Even with the game on low to medium graphical settings and running it on my PCIe SSD, I had 3 major bugs where I had to restart the game and a multitude of smaller ones that honestly were funny enough to make me laugh, so I didn't mind them at all. With all that being said, welcome to my experience with the Dead Space remake. We open on a video of Nicole playing the pronoun game with Isaac. She seems a little nervous and maybe a bit worried. Something's going on, things are falling apart, and my game crashed. We slowly pan away from the video and meet the crew. You play as Isaac, the system engineer, voiced by Gunnar Wright, which canonically makes Isaac part of the Taco Bell cinematic universe, along with Brimstone and Neon White. Daniels is the computer specialist, and you'll see her all of about 5 times throughout the whole game, other than on a video chat. From what I understand, she's extremely annoying in the original, but right now, other than a mild annoyance of her existing, she's kind of forgettable throughout the whole game. And lastly, you're introduced to Zach Hammond, who runs the operation as chief security guard. He's your by-the-books, no lollygagging, stern soldier type, and he doesn't really trust anyone. He did background checks on the whole crew before they came out here.
I ran standard CEC background checks, Miss Daniels. If you want to work in the big leagues, you have to play ball.
He's also got his 2 henchmen, Chen and Johnston, but let's just say they have less personality and even less life expectancy. You are on a mission to repair the USG Ishimura, a planet cracker that's comms went down after sending out a distress signal. As the crew approaches, Isaac's a bit concerned because the lights are off on the ship and they're not really getting a response from comms. Then, as they start to dock, the gravity tethers break and they crash land into the Ishimura.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
After getting off the ship, you make your way to the registration station, and nobody's there. So, in the words of Fred Jones,
let's split up and look for clues.
You, as the lone protagonist, leave your team to find out that basically the whole ship is kinda screwed. Like, it's less a ship and more a pile of floating metal kinda screwed. And then Chen says the line,
Could do that kind of damage to a planet cracker.
There's a little rattle of the vents as something crawls around. Quarantine comes down on the room, locking everyone inside. And in a subversion of every horror trope ever, Hammond is not the first to die. As Chen gets stabbed in the back, blood smears across the window in front of you, and the door to your escape opens. And in probably the most tense part of the whole game, you have to run escaping to the elevator. And this scene right here would easily make top 10 best elevators in video games. Oh, that's disgusting. Getting off the elevator, you find the plasma cutter, which is objectively the best weapon in the game, and as you step away, scrawled in blood, cut off their limbs. Dismemberment in Dead Space is huge. Everything can have their arms, legs, and heads ripped off. It's both really cool and really gruesome, but really important. Every enemy has a weak point, and it's important you find it so that you're not mag dumping every enemy you come across. My personal strategy was to go for the knees, and then when the necromorph was down on the ground, stun lock them with your stomp till they die and drop their goods. When you meet up with Daniels and Hammond again, you learn that the tram car is down, but to get it back up and running, you need a data chip for the computers. This is the general game loop for Dead Space. Something isn't working quite right, and you, the engineer, need to go fix it. This generally requires you to solve a couple puzzles, get an upgrade, kill a couple necromorphs, and fix whichever part of the ship needs the most help. After fixing the tram car, Isaac makes his way back to the USG Kellyanne, the broken ship that everyone came here on, and Johnston, who's been hanging back this whole time because of her broken ankle, is a bit perplexed.
Is that blood?
She never went inside the Ishimura, so obviously she didn't hear any of the comms. Well, we've got some explaining to do here. But then suddenly, oh no, what's this? Our ship's singularity core is being attacked? It explodes, and with it, so does our only way out of here. Reconnecting with Hammond and Daniels, we get our new task of stealing codes off the corpse of the captain down in medical, but not before Daniels and Hammond get attacked by the corpse of Chen.
Where are other doctors? Oh yeah, in morgue!
I have a lot to say about intensive care. We get the best module upgrade of the game within the first minute of intensive care, and that's the kinesis module. This allows us to move metallic objects and or carry boxes or generators from point A to point B, but it also lets us throw objects. You can pick up the claws of dismembered necromorphs and throw them back at another necromorph, and not only does it just look awesome, but it also does a lot of damage and the knockback. Intensive care is also the first time we experience a quarantine zone, where the game kicks the action up to 11 and sends wave after wave of necromorph at us. And since we're locked in a room with blaring lights and warning signals going off, the first time this happens, it's really effective to get that hair-rising, oh no, I'm in danger kind of tension, and it plays out for just long enough to be stressful. But you know what is annoying? Babies. These stupid little children that run around medicine constantly. And no, I am not just mad they ruined my Z-Ball game. These little troglodytes are able to climb walls and shoot little needles at you from across the room. It is not scary, it is just annoying. Ugh. And just to describe in a visual representation of how much I hate these little babies, I've put together a tier list of all the enemies in Dead Space. Here at the top you've got the Hunter and the Leaper, and way down here at the bottom you have the reason I will never have kids. After making your way through a barricade and into the morgue, Isaac finds the corpse of the captain and... why can't I move? Yeah, my game froze for probably one of the best cutscenes in the game. Oh, there was a cutscene that was supposed to play out. So the reason I've spent so much time on chapters 1 and 2 is because they're easily my favorite parts of this game. They set the scene for both the story of the Unitologists and their cult, as well as the necromorphs, really well, and they're probably the most scary the game gets, which I kind of find disappointing. Whenever I heard anyone talk about Dead Space, it would always come up as this really terrifying horror experience, and I don't really think it is.
My number one goal was to scare the heck out of one person. I wanted to make the scariest game.
The game was made as a tribute to Resident Evil 4, which, while it's a really good game, and I'm really hyped for the remake, was also the Resident Evil that started the trend of Resident Evil games becoming action-adventure games. Dead Space is very generous in the amount of ammo that it gives you. There was no point in the game where I couldn't mag dump a necromorph if I needed to. My pockets were quite literally lined in bullets. The enemies are also really telegraphed. It's really easy to tell which air duct they're going to come from and which body on the floor is going to get up as you walk over it. Along with this, each necromorph has a string quartet following it around, and it plays every time you look in its general direction. Stay down.
Wait, it's all water? Always has been.
From what I understand from people who have played the original, the zero gravity experience was nowhere near as smooth as it is here. You've got full directional movement, and if you get motion sick, you're going to get motion sick here. The zero gravity works best in the large open areas where you can mess around with it, and I experienced a rather funny bug during my first playthrough. After getting the captain's credentials from the morgue, you'll be tasked with restarting the ship's engines. This involves refueling the north and south engine, and you know that one scene from the Avengers where Iron Man is restarting the airship's turbines? Yeah, you gotta do that as well. It's such a good area too. Your oxygen's depleting and you're forced to time yourself going in and out of cover while a giant centrifuge almost kills you, and on top of that, the necromorphs are trying to block your way, and just as you think you've made it to safety... Oxygen. Okay, I was gonna say... Oh, what the heck is this? Oh, why are there baby heads in it? That is disgusting. This isn't a hard boss fight by any means, just shoot the giant orange ball, but it is easily one of the best in the game. And the tentacle is one of the most iconic moments in Dead Space. If you're into learning about how games are made, I'd highly recommend watching the video, How Dead Space's Scariest Scene Almost Killed the Game. Gwen Schofield, the lead creator of the original Dead Space, sits down and talks about the creation of Dead Space and how this scene in particular almost didn't make it.
Shoot 'em, bitches!
So Isaac's been putting the team on his back, gotten the captain's credentials, started the engine ships. Next on the list is playing asteroids. Chapter 4 has us reconnecting with Hammond, where we learn that he's managed to trap the necromorph of Chen in an escape pod with a window, and then after talking about the containment this whole freaking time, proceeds to pull a lever to shoot the escape pod off into space. I'm sure that it won't come back to bite us in the butt later. We also learn that the ADS cannons are offline and we have to manually set them up again. So Hammond sets us off like the good little fetch quest boy we are, and as Isaac returns to the atrium, we get a boss fight with a brute, which is more of a bullet sponge than anything else. I learned a little bit ago that you can actually stasis this and shoot it in its butt, and it kills it next to instantly, but it really hurts if you let it get too close to you, and isn't that big a deal as long as you kite it. This part of the game actively attempted to murder my computer. I have no idea what it is about the atrium, but my computer was on life support the entire time I existed in that room. Isaac's adventure takes him through the electrical room as well, which is another area I had a problem with. See, in my playthrough, there was an electrical switch that never turned off, and I didn't have health or meds to get through it, so I was soft locked, and I actually had to backtrack and buy health to be able to walk back through the electricity. Making your way outside the ship to the ADS cannons, you'll find another great use of zero gravity. Isaac just has to float around, arming the ADS cannons so that they'll destroy the meteors. It's genuinely a lot of fun and sets you up for a boss fight later. So at the end of Chapter 4, you intercept a call from Nicole, who, by the way, the remake did really dirty. I believe that Isaac is in his late 40s, early 50s during the events of Dead Space 1, and his original model gives him that look. He looks like he'd be a senior engineer, but now in the remake, they tone that back a bit, and you know, late 30s, early 40s, he's looking kind of great. Nicole, on the other hand, went from her late 30s to 60 plus, which in my head canonically confirms that Isaac is into gilfs.
Fuck me!
Anyway, tangent aside, Nicole sends off a broadcast and is in the medical bay, so being the loving boyfriend you are, trying to still find her, you change course and head back down to the medical bay. But there you find out, someone's done something with the place. It looks way more culty. You get to the room where the broadcast came from, and you realize, what's this?
Just a trick.
Isaac. Make us.
And then enter Dr. Mercer. I like his character a lot. He's that conniving cultist who's gone so far in the head. The Unitologists worship a marker, a spirally tentacle dildo from space, and because the marker turns people into necromorphs, Dr. Mercer believes that this is the next step to human evolution. Wow, this really does sound like Resident Evil. As he leaves the room, the monster in the container behind us bursts open and out comes the hunter. You can't kill the hunter because it regenerates its limbs over time, but gives a pretty tense chase scene as you try to escape it. Mercer has the medical bay on lockdown, and Isaac has to make his way to Mercer's office and turn off the said lockdown, while avoiding various traps like poison gas or the hunter chasing you, until we get into a room with cryopods and a liquid nitrogen chamber, and wow, this looks like a boss battle.
Give me the plane.
I did not like hydroponics at all. But that makes sense because I also wasn't a fan of the lab in Resident Evil either. Isaac's mission here is to fix the air quality issues on the Ishimura, which is easier said than done. You're introduced to Cross here. She's a researcher whose team has been altered by the Leviathan. You have to go around the hydroponics plant and kill off each of the team members because they're spewing out poison gas, which is the reason the air quality is so low. I think this is where the game starts to lead heavily into action rather than horror. The number of enemies you start to fight goes up exponentially, and they start to make it so you can't progress until you clear all of the enemies in the area. On the bright side though, the tentacle arm comes back again for round 2, and it's just as good as before. This time it grabs you and drags you down a long corridor over the overgrown alien goo, which is really cool. The Leviathan is another example of how Dead Space has some really solid boss fights. This is your first one in Zero Gravity, and it's pretty simple at first, but I like it. You've just got to dodge the hentai tentacles and shoot the yellow pustules. In the second phase, it lets out all of its poison gas and starts spitting pus bombs at you, which you have kinesis for. You can grab them and shoot them back. After you beat it, it gets ejected out in space, never to be seen from again.
The children yearns for the mines.
Chapter 7 is in my top 5 best chapters of this game of all time. Isaac learns from Cross that there's an SOS beacon that's being made, and it's down in the mining deck. I adore the world building that is the mining deck. It's full of traps set up by the survivors, laser wires, trip mines, barricades, anything you could possibly think to set up to protect yourself. And it's really harrowing. Like, they all died down here trying to save themselves. The mining deck also has a really great elevator scene. Absolutely creepy, but the game then doubles down on Isaac going crazy by bringing Nicole back again, because the first 3 times we've seen her she wasn't real, so I'm sure this time she is. But I mean, hey, she started helping us out, turning switches and pulling levers, so maybe she is this time. After retrieving the beacon, we place it on an asteroid and launch it into space, hoping that it makes it out to someone.
I think the word you're searching for is Space Ranger.
So in Chapter 8, the crew realizes that the Ishimura communications control is dead, which means that even if someone catches the SOS that we launched, the Ishimura won't be able to hear any returning message, which is kind of maybe, you know, a little important. It results in Isaac making his way over to the communications section of the ship and solving a puzzle that took me way longer than I'd ever like to admit to figure out. Finishing up fixing the communications panel, we instantly receive a message that's a little alarming. Remember that escape pod Hammond set off a couple chapters ago? You know, the one with the glass window on it where you can see inside and see the necromorph? Well, the USM Valor picked it up, and instead of looking in that window, they opened the bloody pod. Honestly genius if you ask me though. Daniels tries to warn them, but something is blocking the antenna, and yeah, maybe we didn't get rid of the Leviathan from earlier. This boss fight ties back into the asteroid minigame from earlier, but instead of asteroids, you're shooting the giant necromorph. So, you know, win-win. After we get the antenna out so that we can send a wide range message. Wow, why was that so hard? Daniels sends the warning out to find out that we were maybe just a bit late.
Tactical nuke ready for launch.
On board the USM Valor, we find a new type of necromorph. The soldiers on board all have stasis modules, and they got infused in the transformation to create a really fast, glitchy necromorph, and honestly, looks sick. Top tier. Genuinely one of my favorites. And we've got 2 missions on this ship. The first is to borrow the Singularity Core because they don't need it and we need it to escape. And the other is to stop it from blowing the heck up because there is a gosh darn nuke on board. I failed at that second mission a couple times because I didn't realize that I couldn't let the necromorph explode. The ship also has some really nice set pieces. The infirmary on board has a broken laser which is actively spinning, killing everything that walks through it. You have to use your stasis on it to avoid the lasers. There's also a shooting range minigame that you can play for a nice little prize. Honestly, it's a lot of fun. Highly recommend. I regret not having the pulse rifle, but the real plot happens right before you get to the Singularity Core. Hammond is dumb and deserves to die. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Picking up the Singularity Core, Isaac books it out of the USM Valor as it falls apart, and that's the end of the chapter.
I gotta get
on that plane!
This whole chapter is about getting the extra space shuttle up and running so that you can escape. And on one hand, it has the best minigame of all time, Z-Ball. It's also one of my favorite interactions with Dr. Mercer, where he kills Temples with a nail gun. This chapter also has Dr. Kane, who wants to take the marker back to Aegis 7, where they found it, and even though he's a tad on the crazy side, Isaac agrees that it probably would be the best course of action. On the other hand, this is my least favorite area to explore because the executive suites are in constant quarantine, which means that you're going to enter a room, have a quarantine, and then have to clear the enemies in the room, rinse and repeat, and I found it really tedious. But I might be the weird one here, I don't know. Chapter 10 ends with another pretty cool boss fight. You have to kill another hunter, but this time you have to use the back exhaust of the shuttle and burn it to a crisp. Now, chapters 11 and 12 I'm going to group together. They aren't very long, and basically, after loading the marker onto the shuttle, Daniels betrays us and shoots Kynes. She does the stereotypical explain who she truly is, and we learn that she's been working for EarthGov this whole time, and she's going to bring the marker back to Earth because she feels it's safest there on Earth with a bunch of other people slowly being influenced by it. After she escapes with the marker, we reroute the shuttle back to the Ishimura. Daniels uses the escape pod and lands on Aegis 7, and we, with the help of Nicole, who is just a little bit robotic, little concerning, not that much, take off to Aegis 7 to return the marker. So this planet is where the game ends. Isaac has to return the marker to the pedestal on the planet, and honestly, it's a really long, tedious process that almost feels like an escort mission. You have to keep opening pathways for the marker to be transported through until you finally make it to the end where you place the marker on the pedestal. Now, I have a problem with how they explain away Nicole. So Daniel shows up, she captures Nicole, and then forces Isaac to watch through the video Nicole sends him at the beginning of the game, but this time to watch it all the way through. But like at the beginning of the game, they say that he's already watched it a dozen times on repeat.
We're 5 minutes out, you still got that thing on repeat.
But rant aside, we find out that it's not Nicole, surprise surprise, it's actually what's her face? Why can't I remember her name? Cross. That's what it is. Finds out it's actually Cross. The place starts falling apart and the marker with it. So we've got to make it back to the ship and safety, which leads us to the final boss, the Hive Mind. It's not a bad boss, but it's also not my favorite boss in the whole game. Remember how this game was made to be Resident Evil in space? That's what this boss fight is. Way over the top, really cheesy, shoot the yellow pus balls and you win. Isaac, after killing the boss, gets to the shuttle and escapes Aegis 7. Now, all that being said, Dead Space is a really fun game. I honestly would recommend it, and I can see myself playing the remake of 2 if they ever decide to make it. The issues the game has are largely what every AAA game has currently. The issues this game has are largely what every AAA game currently have. It's nowhere near as bad as some, but I do think that having 3 game-breaking bugs in my one playthrough, combined with the frame dropping and other minor bugs, there's no way I could ever say that this game is perfect and worth $60, but it might be to you. So that's about it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'm out.